She spent 11 years building a rehabilitation method so effective it changed how the NFL treats its athletes. Players who were told they'd never play again came back, stronger, better. And every single time it happened, one man stood at the podium and took the credit. Her name was never mentioned, not once. But Mara Kinsley kept records. She kept everything. And when she finally decided she was done being invisible, Conrad Vale had absolutely no idea what was coming. This is the Retribution File.
I always got there before everyone else. 5:30 in the morning, when Lincoln Financial Field was still completely empty, and the smell of artificial turf mixed with the cold Philadelphia air, I was already there. Down in the medical facilities on the sub-level, fluorescent lights still flickering on, heating system just starting to wake up. 11 years of doing that. 11 years of being the first one in, and most of the time, the last one out. And in all those years, I never once saw my name in an official press release. Not in a single public statement. Not in one post-game interview after a recovery that should have been impossible. I was the invisible hand, and for a long time, I let it be that way. My name is Mara Kinsley. I'm 38 years old. I'm a certified physical therapist and functional rehabilitation coach with a specialization in sports biomechanics from Penn State. I spent my first 4 years working in private clinics in Pittsburgh, and then in 2014, I was hired as a junior physical therapist by the Philadelphia Eagles. Junior? That was the title I came in with. But titles, as I'd come to learn, have very little to do with the actual work. My first 2 years, I mostly observed. I learned how the organization operated, who actually made the decisions, where the gaps were, and there was one gap that was impossible to ignore. The rehabilitation protocol for serious musculoskeletal injuries was generic, overly conservative, and produced mediocre results. Players recovered on the minimum acceptable timeline, but they rarely came back to the level they were at before the injury. I believed that could change. It took me 3 years to develop what I privately called the KRM, the Kinsley Rehabilitative Model. That wasn't an official name. It was just what I wrote in my notebooks, in my session notes, in the spreadsheets I kept on a personal server I'd set up within the team's network, a secondary backup that nobody knew existed, and that I'd been feeding methodically since 2016. The KRM had 5 phases. It combined progressive neuromuscular stimulation with controlled eccentric loading and real-time proprioceptive feedback protocols. It was different from anything being used at the time, longer in the early phases and dramatically faster in the final ones. The first real test came in 2017. Marcus Webb, I'm not using his real name out of respect for his privacy, but anyone who followed the Eagles that season knows exactly who I'm talking about, suffered a complete anterior cruciate ligament rupture combined with a medial meniscus tear. 2 independent surgeons, plus the team's chief physician, all submitted evaluations. The consensus was clear. Return to professional sport was unlikely, career probably over. He was 24 years old. I requested authorization to run his rehabilitation using my protocol. The authorization came back signed by Conrad Vale. 7 months and 18 days later, Marcus Webb walked onto the field in the 3rd quarter of a regular season game. He ran 67 yards that day. Conrad Vale had been vice president of medical operations for the Eagles for 12 years by the time I was hired. He had the kind of presence that fills a room before he even says a word. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly groomed silver hair, always wearing that well-pressed Eagles blazer. He was charismatic, polished. He knew the name of every sports journalist in Philadelphia and which team they'd rooted for as kids. And he was absolutely brilliant at one specific thing, showing up at exactly the right moment. When Marcus Webb came back on the field, Conrad Vale was on the sideline. When cameras went looking for someone to interview about the Eagles' medical miracle, Conrad was available, smiling, composed, with prepared answers about the innovative vision of the multidisciplinary medical commission that had led the process. I was in the warm-up room, helping Marcus with his final stretches before the game. I didn't watch the interview live. I watched it later, alone on my phone. Conrad talked for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. At no point was my name mentioned. I want to say that without bitterness, because back then I genuinely believed it was a matter of hierarchy, that my work would be recognized internally, even if Conrad was the public face, that the people who mattered would know. I was wrong. Over the next 3 years, the KRM was applied to 4 more high-risk cases. 4 more athletes who'd received devastating prognoses. 4 more athletes who came back. And every single time, the pattern repeated itself with almost mechanical precision. Conrad Vail would appear, give the interview, mention the medical team received the praise from the front office, and I'd keep arriving at 5:30, keep feeding my backup server, keep writing in my notebooks, and keep telling myself that someday things would be different. The day everything changed came in 2023, just not in the way I expected. In March of 2023, I received an email from the American College of Sports Medicine, the ACSM, with a call for submissions for their annual conference in November, which happened to be scheduled right here in Philadelphia. I'd submitted an internal paper to the team's own medical committee back in 2020. It was archived as under review and never published. But I had submitted something externally to the Journal of Athletic Training back in 2019. That paper described the foundations of the KRM. It was accepted for peer review, then rejected for insufficient longitudinal data. I kept the submission protocol. I kept everything. When I opened the ACSM email, I found the draft conference program, and there, on the main panel of Day 2, was this title: Kinesthetic Recovery Methodology, a new framework for post-surgical athletic rehabilitation. Presenter, Dr. Conrad Vail, VP Medical Operations, Philadelphia Eagles. I read it 3 times. KRM, Kinesthetic Recovery Methodology. He'd changed one word, from Kinsley to kinesthetic. And he was about to present my method, 11 years of work, 5 documented cases, hundreds of hours of data, to 800 physicians and athletic trainers from across the country, with his name on it. I closed the laptop. I walked to the window of my apartment in Fishtown and stood there for about 20 minutes. It was a Tuesday in March, light drizzle outside, a dog barking somewhere on a lower floor. And I made a decision that had taken me 11 years to make. I was done being invisible. I wasn't going to confront him that day. No email, no phone call, no meeting request. Conrad Vail was politically untouchable inside the organization. He had the front office's full confidence, and any rushed move on my part would be dismissed as professional jealousy from a subordinate. I needed something better than indignation. I needed proof, and I knew exactly where it was. End of part 1. Cliffhanger. Mara begins gathering evidence from the backup server she built herself, the one Conrad never knew existed. When I was hired by the Eagles back in 2014, one of the very first things I did was set up my own digital work environment inside the organization's infrastructure. It wasn't anything unusual at the time. I developed that habit back in college, creating backup layers for everything: physical notebooks, local digital files, and a secondary server I'd manually feed every Friday afternoon. It was as automatic a routine as washing your hands before a procedure. The server I configured inside the Eagles' network was technically within the organization system, but in a partition I deliberately named to blend in: MK_physio_research_archive. Nothing special about the name. Just another work folder among dozens of others. Nobody had asked me to create it. Nobody had asked me not to. For 9 years, I'd been feeding that server with everything. Every version of the KRM protocol, from the earliest rough draft I scratched out in 2015 all the way to the refined version I completed in 2022. Every session report from the 5 main cases. Every progress spreadsheet, every muscle load chart, every clinical observation note. And this was the part Conrad Vale had no idea about. Every relevant email I'd sent or received, automatically archived by a simple script I'd written back in 2016. The metadata on every single file was intact. Creation dates, modification dates, authorship. That Wednesday night in March, I sat down at my desk at 10 p.m. and accessed the server for the first time in weeks. It took me 40 minutes to find exactly what I needed, and when I found it, I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. The document was called KRM_V1.0_M_Kinsley_20 Creation date, March 14th, 2016. System authorship, Mara Kinsley. Content, all 5 phases of the protocol, described in complete technical detail with the exact terminology I had developed, including the phrase kinesthetic recovery sequence, which I had used in Section 3, Paragraph 2, to describe the transition between phases 2 and 3 of the protocol. Kinesthetic recovery. Conrad had taken exactly that phrase, swapped out sequence for methodology, and put his name in front of it. But there was something else. In 2021, Conrad had asked me to prepare an internal document summarizing the KRM results for a presentation to the executive board. I'd prepared it, sent it by internal email on September 17th, 2021, with the subject line, KRM Summary, Confidential, for internal review only. That email was archived on my server, with a timestamp. Sender, mara.kinsley@philadelphiaeagles.com. Recipient, conrad.vale@philadelphiaeagles.com. And there was his reply, sent 2 days later. Mara, excellent work as always. I'll handle the presentation to the board. No need for you to be in the room for this one. I'll keep it high level. Thanks. He had presented to the board. I was never invited into that room. And now he was about to present that same work to 800 national specialists. I printed the documents, put them in a folder, and went to bed, for the first time in weeks, with a strange, cold clarity I didn't quite know how to name yet. I met Patricia Shen in 2018 at a Applied Biomechanics seminar at Penn Medicine. She was a senior researcher in the musculoskeletal medicine department, specializing in post-surgical neuromotor recovery. Small, precise with every word she chose, and she had this habit of asking questions that made speakers visibly uncomfortable. We became friends the way 2 very busy people become friends, slowly, over email, with gaps of months between messages, but with real consistency. In 2020, when I was refining Phase 4 of the KRM, the real-time proprioceptive feedback section, I reached out to Patricia, explained what I was developing, asked for her technical input off the record. She spent 3 weeks reviewing my methodology, sent me 14 pages of comments and suggestions, and refused any form of compensation. "You're developing something that's going to change the field," she'd written. "Let me know when you publish." I never published, but Patricia had kept every single one of our email exchanges. The Thursday, after I found the conference program, I called her at 8 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring. "Mara, it's been a while." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, direct, but warm underneath. "Patricia, I need to tell you something, and then I need to ask you a favor." A short pause. "Go ahead." It took me 22 minutes to explain everything. Patricia didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the silence on her end lasted maybe 10 seconds. "You have the files from the server?" she asked. "I have everything." "And the emails?" "All archived, with timestamps. Another pause. Mara, you know that I technically collaborated on the development of Phase 4, right? I have our exchanges, dates, specific technical content, all of it. She wasn't asking. She was organizing out loud, the way she did when she was working through a clinical problem. That's relevant legally. That makes me an expert witness who can attest that the protocol was developed by you, in what time frame, using what methodology. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Do you have an attorney? Not yet. I know someone, she said immediately. She specializes in intellectual property with a focus on sports law. She's based in Philadelphia. If you want, I can make the introduction today. Diane Okafor was 44 years old, a partner at a boutique firm specializing in sports law and intellectual property called Okafor and Reese. And she had the most organized office I had ever walked into. Shelves with color-coded case files, a completely clear desk except for a legal pad and a pen, and a plant in the corner that clearly belonged to someone who never forgot to water it. We met that Friday afternoon. Patricia came with me. I placed the folder on the desk. Diane opened it, read in silence for 15 minutes while Patricia and I drank coffee. She didn't say a word while she read. When she finished, she closed the folder carefully and looked at me. How many people inside the organization know that you developed this protocol? Formally? Nobody, besides Conrad. Informally, the athletes I put through rehabilitation know it was me. The assistant physical therapist who worked with me on the last 2 cases knows, but nothing is documented with my name on it. The assistant. What's his name? Kevin Tran. He still works with the team. Diane wrote the name down. And the athlete from the first case? The one Conrad used as proof of success in his interviews? I hesitated. He retired in 2022. He works as a commentator for ESPN now. His name is Derek Holloway. Diane stopped writing. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read right away. Derek Holloway. She said the name slowly. Mara, Derek Holloway, gave a talk at the Sports Medicine Summit in 2022 in Las Vegas. I was in the audience. He spent 12 minutes talking about the physical therapist who saved his career. Said she got there every day at 5:30 in the morning, that she knew exactly what he needed before he could even describe it himself, and that without her, he never would have come back. I felt something tighten in my chest. He didn't say my name. No, he said she had asked not to be publicly identified, that she preferred the focus to be on the athlete, not on the method. I had said that to Derek back in 2018. I genuinely believed at the time that it was the right thing to do, that my work would speak for itself within the right walls. But he knows your name, said Diane. It wasn't a question. He does. Diane closed the legal pad. So you have server documentation with metadata dating back to 2016, internal emails with timestamps, technical collaboration from a Penn medicine researcher with records going back to 2020, an assistant who worked directly alongside you on the most recent cases, and a high-profile athlete who can publicly attest that you were the one who rehabilitated him. She paused. And the conference is in November. That's 7 months away. 7 months, I confirmed. Diane Okafor smiled for the first time since we'd walked into that office. Then we have time to do this right. I drove home that Friday with a feeling I hadn't carried in all 11 years working there. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't certainty of winning. It was something simpler than that, and a whole lot more solid. It was the feeling of finally playing the game, not waiting for someone to invite me to the table. Diane had laid out the first steps with precision. First, formally document everything on the server. Create a legal inventory with a hash of each file to guarantee the integrity of the evidence. Second, interview Kevin Tran off the record to assess whether he was willing to testify. Third, Patricia would prepare a technical declaration attesting to her collaboration on the development of Phase 4 with specific dates and content. And fourth, and this was the move Diane called the most important one, we needed to find out whether Conrad had filed any formal registration or publication request for the method, either in the name of the franchise or in his own name. If he had tried to formally protect what he'd stolen, that created a much bigger legal problem for him, and a much bigger opportunity for us. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building the inventory. It was 11 p.m. when I finished the first section. Outside, Philadelphia was asleep. Inside, I was just getting started. Diane discovers that Conrad has submitted a formal publication to the Journal of Sports Medicine under the franchise's name without listing a single collaborator. The publication is scheduled to go live 2 months before the conference. It was Kevin Tran who tipped me off. It was a Monday morning in April, 3 weeks after my meeting with Diane. I was in the women's locker room at the medical facility, changing after an early session, when my phone buzzed with a text message. No greeting, the way Kevin always texted when something was bothering him. "Did you see the Journal of Sports Medicine? June edition? Check the author name?" I went to the bathroom, pulled up the website on my phone, found the June edition under Advanced Publications, articles that had been accepted and posted online ahead of the print issue. The title read, Kinesthetic Recovery Methodology, Clinical Outcomes in Post-Surgical Athletic Rehabilitation, a 5-year retrospective analysis. Author, Conrad A. Vail, VP Medical Operations, Philadelphia Eagles. Affiliated institution, Philadelphia Eagles Sports Medicine Division. Listed collaborators, none. 5 years of data, 5 cases. Every single athlete I had rehabilitated, every number I had collected, analyzed, and documented. Published formally with peer review in one of the most respected journals in American sports medicine, under Conrad Vail's name. I walked out of the bathroom, down the hallway, into the supply room. I closed the door behind me and stood there in silence for 2 full minutes. Then I texted Diane. Diane Okafor was at the office when I arrived at 6:30 that evening. Patricia had joined by video call. Kevin Tran, who I'd quietly reached out to the week before and who had agreed to talk off the record, was sitting in the chair next to mine, visibly tense. Diane had printed the article. It was on the table in front of her, marked up in pen across several sections. "He made a mistake," she said, without any preamble. "A big one." "Walk us through it," said Patricia. "A formal publication in a peer-reviewed scientific journal creates a dated, immutable public record." Diane tapped the first page of the article with her finger. "This is fundamentally different from giving an interview or making an internal presentation. This is scientific authorship falsification. It's a direct violation of the Committee on Publication Ethics Guidelines, the COPE, and it can result in a formal retraction, an organizational investigation, and depending on how the intellectual property was registered, a civil lawsuit for damages." "He knew that when he submitted it," said Kevin, his voice low. It was the first time he'd spoken since we arrived. "He knew. I heard him tell the franchise's legal counsel back in January that a formal publication would, and I'm quoting him here, consolidate the intellectual property of the method." The silence that followed was heavy. "Kevin," Diane said carefully, "would you be willing to put that in a formal declaration?" Kevin looked at his hands. Then he looked at me. "I've worked with you for 4 years, Mara. I was in those sessions. I watched you build every single phase of that protocol." He paused. "Yeah, I'm willing." While Kevin and I were talking, Diane had done something I hadn't thought to do myself. She'd checked the article's submission date to the journal. "The article was submitted in November of 2022, she said. "Accepted in February 2023, published online in advance in April 2023. I did the math quickly. November 2022 was 2 months after I sent him the KRM summary by internal email, the September 2021 email. Not exactly, said Diane. September 2021 was the first email, but you sent him an updated version in September 2022, correct? With the data from cases 4 and 5. I stopped. She was right. I had sent a comprehensive update in September of 2022, incorporating the 2 most recent cases. 2 additional years of data, the most complete version I had ever put together. Conrad received that update in September. He submitted the article in November. 2 months. He used your update directly, said Patricia, connecting the dots out loud. The data from cases 4 and 5 in the article. Those are the numbers you collected and organized. If the figures match what's on your server, they'll match, I said. I know they will. Diane made a long note on her legal pad. So we have a clear timeline. Protocol development documented from 2016. External technical collaboration documented from 2020. Internal communications with Conrad documented in 2021 and again in 2022. Article submitted exactly 2 months after receiving the most complete version of the data. She set down her pen. That's not a coincidence. That's a deliberate and documentable pattern. It was Patricia who suggested reaching out to Derek. You need to know what level he's willing to engage at, she said. An informal statement is one thing. Testifying publicly is something else entirely. I'd thought about that a lot. Derek Holloway was an ESPN commentator. He had a career built on his public image. Getting involved in a legal dispute against an NFL franchise, even as a retired player, carried real risk for him. I sent him a direct message on Instagram. Short. Derek, it's Mara Kinsley. I need to talk to you about something important. Call me when you can. He called back in 40 minutes. Mara. His voice sounded exactly the way I remembered it. Deep, with that soft South Florida accent. It's been a long time. It really has. Derek, I need to walk you through a situation and then ask you one direct question. You might decide you don't want any part of this, and I'll completely understand either way. Go ahead. I explained everything in 15 minutes. Derek listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Mara, he said finally, you know I talked about you in Las Vegas in 2022. I found out afterward. I didn't say your name because you'd asked me not to, but I wanted to. I always wanted to. A pause. 3 doctors told me my career was over. You were the only one who told me it wasn't. And then you proved it. Another pause, longer this time. What do you need from me? A declaration, describing the rehabilitation process, that it was you who led it, that it was you who developed the protocol, and that Conrad Vail was not present at a single rehabilitation session. Silence. He wasn't present at any session? Not one. Do you remember ever seeing him during your rehabilitation? Derek was quiet for a few more seconds. When he spoke, there was something different in his voice. Colder. More certain. No, I never saw that man. Not once. By May, Diane had assembled what she called the opening package. 3 documents to be delivered simultaneously on the same day to 3 separate recipients. The first, a formal letter to the Committee on Publication Ethics, the COPE, requesting an investigation into authorship falsification in the article published in the Journal of Sports Medicine. Attachments, the server file inventory with integrity hashes, Patricia Shen's technical declaration, Kevin Tran's declaration, Derek Holloway's declaration. The second, a formal notice to the Philadelphia Eagles executive leadership, informing them of the ongoing investigation and requesting access to the institutional server for independent verification of authorship records. The third, a letter directly to the Journal of Sports Medicine, requesting a temporary suspension of the print publication of the article, which had not yet gone to print, pending an authorship investigation. "When do we send?" I asked. "When you give me the word," said Diane. "But Mara, before that, I need you to do one thing." "What's that?" "You still work there. Conrad doesn't know anything yet. You're going to keep showing up, keep doing your job, keep your routine exactly the same until the day we send. No change in behavior, no pulling back, no conflict." She looked at me carefully. "Can you do that?" I thought about the 11 years of practice I'd had at being invisible. "I can do that," I said. "I've had a lot of practice. It was at a department meeting in May. Conrad was at the head of the table, running through the medical department's second-half calendar. He was fluid, confident, exactly the way he'd always been. At one point, he mentioned the November conference. "We're going to have a significant presence at the ACSM this year," he said, with that smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "I have a confirmed presentation on the main panel. It's going to be a real visibility opportunity for the organization." I was sitting 3 chairs to his left. I made a note on my legal pad. I smiled when he glanced in my direction. 11 years of practice. That night, I sent a message to Diane. "Send the package Monday morning." The package lands simultaneously on 3 fronts, and within 72 hours, the Journal of Sports Medicine suspends the print publication of the article. Conrad Vail receives formal notice from the franchise. And for the first time in 11 years, he comes looking for Mara. Diane sent the package Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. 3 letters, 3 recipients, delivered simultaneously by certified mail and email with red receipts. I got to work at 5:30, same as always, did my morning rounds, set up the treatment room for the first session of the day, watered the small fern I'd kept on my office windowsill for 6 years. Tuesday afternoon, the Journal of Sports Medicine sent Diane a confirmation. The print publication of the article was temporarily suspended pending an authorship review. The online version was flagged with a formal expression of concern notice, a notation that anyone accessing the article could plainly see. Wednesday morning, the Eagles' executive leadership responded to the formal notice. The franchise's lead legal counsel requested an urgent meeting with Diane for the following week. Wednesday afternoon, Conrad Vail came to my office. He knocked twice and walked in without waiting, the way he'd always done in 11 years, because my office was technically a medical support space and not a room with any kind of access hierarchy. I was sitting at my desk reviewing session reports. I looked up. Conrad closed the door behind him. He wasn't wearing the blue Eagles blazer, the first time I could remember seeing him without it. White dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like someone who hadn't slept well. "Mara," he said. His voice was controlled, but I recognized that containment. It was effort, not naturalness. "Conrad," I replied with the exact same tone I'd used to greet any colleague. He stood on the other side of my desk. He looked at the papers in front of me, then back at me. "I received a notice from legal this morning." "I figured you would." A pause. "That was you, it wasn't a question." I confirmed it with a slight nod. Conrad took a slow breath. When he spoke again, something in his voice was different, smaller. Like for the first time, he wasn't sure how the room was responding to him. "Mara, I never intended to. The work was developed within the organization. Intellectual property generated by employees in an institutional context belongs to Conrad." I cut him off calmly. "My attorney is Diane Okafor at Okafor and Reese. Any communication regarding this matter needs to be directed to her. Here's her card." I placed Diane's business card on the desk, facing him. "I'd genuinely like to continue this conversation, but it wouldn't be appropriate without legal representation present." He looked at the card, then at me. For 11 years, Conrad Vale had filled every silence with his own voice. This time there was nothing to fill it with. He picked up the card, left without another word. I went back to my session reports. Over the weeks that followed, 3 things happened in parallel. The COPE formally opened an authorship investigation. The journal appointed an independent review committee of 3 evaluators to examine the documentation Diane had submitted, the server file inventory with integrity hashes, the declarations from Patricia, Kevin, and Derek, and the full internal communication history. The franchise, for its part, hired an external auditing firm to verify the institutional server records. Diane had anticipated that move and had ensured, through the formal notice sent on Monday, that any attempt to modify or delete files from the server would constitute evidence tampering. The server was intact. Every file I had created since 2016 was there, with original metadata, unmodified. And the third front, the Journal of Sports Medicine had contacted Conrad directly, requesting that he submit supporting documentation of authorship. He had submitted, and Diane obtained a copy through the investigation process, a declaration stating that the protocol had been developed by a multidisciplinary team under his direct supervision. No team member names were listed. When Patricia read that declaration in Diane's office, she closed her eyes for a moment. "He just confirmed there was a team," she said. "A team he didn't name, in a publication where he is the sole listed author." She opened her eyes. "That is academically indefensible." In September, 2 months before the conference, Derek Holloway published a long post on his verified account on X. He hadn't warned me he was going to do it. I found out by phone when Patricia texted me at 7 in the morning on a Thursday with 3 words: "Go check Derek." The post was 847 words. Derek wrote the way he ran, direct, no ornamentation, weight behind every sentence. He started by describing the moment 2 surgeons told him his career was over. He described the months that followed: the depression, the feeling of a shattered identity, the fear of not knowing who he was outside of football. And then he described Mara Kinsley, not as a miracle, as a professional. He described the 5:30 sessions. He described how she had explained every phase of the protocol to him, why each exercise existed, what was happening neurologically in his body, what the goal of each week was. He described the day she told him with complete calm that he was going to play again, and exactly why she knew. She had a name for what she was doing, he wrote. She called it KRM. She told me it stood for her initials. I never forgot that. And at the end, without mentioning Conrad Vale by name, without mentioning the legal process, without mentioning the conference, he wrote, "I owe my career to one person. Her name is Mara Kinsley. It's time her name was known." Within 48 hours, the post had been shared 94,000 times. Sports journalists started asking questions. The franchise issued a vague statement about ongoing internal processes. Conrad Vale made no public comment. The American College of Sports Medicine had quietly removed Conrad Vale from the main panel 3 weeks before the event. No public announcement, just an internal note about program reorganization. I found out through Diane, who found out through the franchise's attorney, who found out through the ACSM's office. What I didn't know, and nobody told me because it had been arranged in silence by Patricia and the conference's scientific committee, was what was going to happen on day 2 of the event. I was there as a registered attendee. I'd paid my own registration fee. I was sitting in the 3rd row of the main auditorium with my attendee badge, listening to a presentation on ankle biomechanics, when Patricia appeared beside me and sat down. "The next panel has been reorganized," she said quietly. "Reorganized how?" She smiled. That small, precise smile I knew well. "You'll see." The moderator stepped up to the podium. It was Dr. James Whitmore, president of the ACSM Scientific Committee, a man I had only ever seen in photographs on academic publications. "Our next presentation has undergone a last-minute reorganization," he said, with the steady voice of someone completely in control of the room. "The panel originally scheduled has been replaced by a presentation that the scientific committee considers of historical importance to the field of sports medicine." He paused. "We'd like to invite to the stage Dr. Mara Kinsley, creator of the Kinsley rehabilitative model, to present the full development and clinical outcomes of a methodology that has quietly transformed the field of athletic rehabilitation over the past 7 years." The auditorium went silent for a moment. Then the applause started. Patricia looked at me. I couldn't say anything. She took my hand and gave it a gentle pull upward. I stood up. I walked to the stage. And for the first time in 11 years, I stepped up to a podium with my name spoken out loud. I presented for 38 minutes. I showed the development of the protocol from 2016 forward. I showed the data from all 5 cases, with athletes identified only by initials, out of respect for their privacy. I showed the progression charts, the return to sport metrics, the re-injury rates in the 18 months following rehabilitation. I showed the collaboration with Patricia Shen, formerly credited as technical collaborator on Phase 4. And at the end, I showed one final slide. White background, black text. 4 lines. Kinsley Rehabilitative Model. Developed 2015 to 2016. First clinical application 2017. Author Mara Kinsley, PT, CSCS. When I finished, Dr. Whitmore returned to the microphone. The ACSM Scientific Committee will formalize in the December edition of our official journal the recognition of Dr. Kinsley as the original author of the KRM. He looked out at the audience. Questions? 800 hands went up. In December, 4 things were formalized at the same time. The COPE issued its conclusion. Conrad Vale's article had violated scientific authorship guidelines. The Journal of Sports Medicine formally retracted the article. The retraction was published in the December print edition, with a note explaining that original authorship had been incorrectly attributed. Conrad Vale's name was removed. The article was republished in the January edition with the correct authorship. Mara Kinsley, PT, CSCS, in collaboration with Patricia Shen, PhD. The Philadelphia Eagles, through an agreement negotiated by Diane, formally acknowledged Mara Kinsley's authorship of the KRM in an internal document, paid financial compensation for 7 years of uncredited use of the protocol, and entered her name into the organization's official records as the developer of the rehabilitation program. Conrad Vale resigned in November, before the retraction was published. The franchise accepted his resignation without public comment, and the American College of Sports Medicine invited Mara Kinsley to join the Sports Medicine Scientific Committee for the 2024 to 2026 cycle. I accepted. In the last week of December, I went back to the medical facility to pick up the last few things from my office. I had formally resigned, not out of defeat, but because I'd received 3 offers from other franchises and had decided to open my own sports rehabilitation clinic in Philadelphia, with Patricia as scientific consultant and Kevin Tran as senior physical therapist. The phone came with me. Before I left, I walked through the main corridor of the medical facility one last time. There was a new nameplate on the wall, small, understated, mounted beside the door of the main treatment room. Kinsley Rehabilitation Protocol, developed in this facility 2015 to 2022. I don't know who ordered it. Diane said it wasn't her. Patricia said the same. Kevin admitted he'd suggested it to the administration, but said the decision had come from the front office. I stood in front of that nameplate for a moment. 11 years of invisibility. 11 years of arriving before everyone else, building something that others took credit for, telling myself that the work would speak for itself within the right walls. The work had spoken. It just needed a bigger stage. I walked out through the main entrance of Lincoln Financial Field for the last time, as an employee. The December cold in Philadelphia cut right through you. I put the Fern on the back seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. I had work to do.